I have a great amount of respect for the community that Americans have attempted to create in a society that does not encourage that. People who look at our economic cold system and go, yeah, but what can I do for the people in my life? Well, how can I make their lives better? How can I make American financial existence, which is brutal and awful, how can I make that warmer and more friendly? How can I reach through and get connected to people instead of keeping myself alone and addicted to screens and at the mercy of economic indicators that are not for me?
Hello, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Nora Kenworthy.
And I'm Marcus Harrison Green. And Nora, we had a monumental weekend, did we not? We saw each other in actual 3D flesh suits for the first time in what feels like forever, to be honest with you.
I mean, I only bring out my 3D meat suit for the really special people in my life.
I felt
no.
honored. I felt honored, I must say.
Yeah, no, it was proof that we're not actually catfishing each other as co-hosts, and proof neither of us has been replaced by some Tilly Norwood style AI actor. Though from what I hear, even that bot emotes better than Dakota Johnson. But I guess so does sterile saline solution.
Wow. I gotta say, I am outing you as someone who also had to unwillingly sit through Madam Web. And
Possibly, yeah.
yeah, well, add that to the list of reasons to cancel Disney Plus. My God.
So many. As if we needed another.
Well, moving towards highlights of our weekend and not lowlights. We both got to attend a conversation with the great Stacey Abrams, someone who can
Mhm.
emote and who we both took a photo with. We could potentially, post that to the IG if you are a follower. That's just a little treat for you. And I gotta say, I met an honest to goodness fan of this podcast at the event, Nora.
So they do exist. They're not a figment of our overstimulated, traumatized imaginations.
Well, at least not this one.
Okay.
As a real person there told me, they said, "I love the show, but maybe start with the good before the doom." So
Okay.
we are, we're letting the listeners know that we saw each other. We found out over Stacy, and yes, I still think she should have been Biden's original VP pick, but that's just my
Yes.
thoughts. Popular
Yes.
opinion
Who
these days, I must say.
Lord only knows if we'd be in this mess if she had been. But I have to say, Stacey is even funnier in person than she is over TV. And you are too humble to admit it, Marcus, but you also spoke at the event, and I gotta say, you totally brought the house down. It was
Oh.
really fun to see you in your element, doing what you do best.
You
Um,
you bring out the best. I was looking down at you. You're sitting next to my partner Danielle, and just the inspiration coming from that section of Town Hall Seattle. It lifted me to new heights. So thank you, Nora.
okay, we do our part. Did you have a favorite moment or a takeaway from the event?
I gotta say, I mean, maybe this is whatever to say, but typically you go to these things, and these political luminary folks are pretty. I don't know. They're kinda, very polished, and you know exactly what they're gonna say. Not to say that Stacey Abrams obviously wasn't, didn't present as very professional and so forth, but she just seemed so genuine in her message,
Yes.
and when she was talking to folks, and she had so much wisdom. But I think the thing that really, stuck with me is she talked about, when she was the, minority leader down in Georgia, which, it has some very interesting politics, shall we say.
Mhm.
And, and there are times, right, where she had to reach across the aisle, to get legislation done. And she talked about being in a situation where, she was never going to compromise her values, while she might sort of compromise her sort of tactic, but she was never
Mhm.
going to compromise her values. And I don't know, that really just stood out to me, particularly
Yeah.
nowadays where a lot of people, quite frankly, don't have the courage to sort of organize with people they mostly agree with. So
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know, that really stood out to me, particularly as this is a time where we're going to have to continue to build coalitions, and it's not always going to be easy.
Yes, and we're gonna have to build coalitions with people we don't always like or agree with all the time. Yeah, I also thought it was really lovely to hear her talk about some of her just insights that I mean, she's just clearly spent so much time on the ground in places like Georgia
Yes.
talking to real voters. I mean, and I think that informs so much of her political wisdom. You know, and she said something at the event, something like, "I don't believe in voter apathy. I believe in voter despair." And what she meant by that was like voters who have not ever gotten anything for being citizens, you know, they who have not really
Yes.
ever had
Yes.
a good experience of what it is to belong to the US, and how that part of her mission is to figure out ways to connect people to those better experiences of what it means to be a citizen, and not just through voting, but she was talking about, like, signing people up for the Affordable Care Act, and
Right.
yeah, it was just yeah, there was so much wisdom and insight there,
Uh,
and also great humor.
Well, folks, we did what that fan of ours asked. We checked off the good news box for today. Now we can get back to the regularly scheduled programming of America is Satan's Open Sewer Pit portion of the show.
Yeah, and what a sewer pit it was this week. Um, since our listeners last heard us, the president summoned the entire military brass for a this could have been a Zoom call meeting, and gave a speech straight out of Emperor Palpatine's playbook, including with telling people when to clap. And yes, I'm speaking of the Star Wars villain modeled on, you know, a certain German leader with a tiny mustache. So it was pretty terrifying to
Yeah.
watch the commander in chief basically say he is bringing a war to American citizens and turning cities like Chicago into live fire training grounds. I'm starting to think that someone in the White House is letting good old Donnie play a few too many first person shooter games late at night, that might be inspiring these fantasies.
Well, I mean, you do have to have good hand-eye coordination, I'm told, for those games. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know.
That's
He's
where he gets his nice physique from, too.
that it is it's military standard, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I but Nora, I gotta say, I mean, obviously, this is like a superficial thing. I mean, all the superficial with uh, our good president here, but at that same address, he started whining about how there are two N words you can't
Oh my
say,
god, yeah.
and I gotta just be real from his delivery. I don't think they're the same two words you and I are thinking of, if you know what I'm saying. So,
Yes.
oh man, oh man.
This is like when my daughter tells me not to use the S word, and I'm like, "Which S word?" And she's like, "Stupid. Don't use that word." Except the reverse, because 'cause I'm sure he's thinking of something way
Yes.
worse.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and not to be out authoritarian, good old defense secretary, and yes, I'm calling it the Defense Department, not what that other name they want us to call it. But Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth followed up by fat shaming generals and rolling out, the quote unquote highest male standards for the military that just so happen to push women out of combat roles. If that means no women qualify, so be it, he said.
Mm, I have complicated feelings about this.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
First of all, I'm gonna need everyone to Google videos of Pete Hegseth doing what he likes to call pull-ups. It is so embarrassing. There's also a lot of great videos of pregnant moms and moms with, like, babies strapped to their chests, like, doing way better pull-ups than he can manage.
Perfect form,
So
yeah.
yes, so there's obviously the grotesque misogyny of this, but then, like, on the other hand, maybe the fewer people rushing to sign up for the imperial war machine, the better. I don't
That's a
I
silver
mean,
lining.
if we expanded these fitness standards to the Seattle police force, we'd be halfway to abolishing the police, so
Maybe even more than halfway. I've seen a couple recently, let me tell you.
yeah.
But that being said, there's also 200 National Guard troops. Sorry, guardsmen. It's
Mm.
Trump's Pentagon after all. That are headed to Portland to crush radical left terrorism, aka sweep up cigarette butts and antagonize people standing near an ICE building.
Mm.
As you know, Nora, Portland is 2 hours down on the I-5. Okay, if I'm driving, it's closer to 2.5 to 3 hours to get there. I mean, I break for every coffee stand and questionable roadside art installation. Sue me, right? But anyway, dude, that's kinda a little too close for comfort, don't you think, Nora?
Yes. Yeah, well, one does feel like he's inching closer and closer to our municipality every day. It's also just so weird to think about, like, January 6th, he would not call in the troops.
No,
But,
no.
like, the knitting circles and D&D clubs of Portland are threat enough to him to justify a mass, troop mobilization. Totally makes sense. But I guess the silver lining here is that in other cities, they've basically just been glorified landscapers once they get there. So, I don't know, maybe Powell's is about to have the tidiest sidewalks in the republic.
I mean, if that is what comes out of it, I mean, all the better, I gotta say.
Yeah.
I did almost trip over, a couple bottles last time I was at Pal, so
Shame on
that would at
Powell's.
least be okay. That being but anyhow, while that was happening, we also had 4 major mass shootings in 24 hours in this country. Yeah, and if you bet on no NFL moment of silence and no presidential reflection on extremist radicalization, especially amongst white men, well, then congrats because you are $5 richer today.
Mhm. Yes. It's so inconvenient when the shooter doesn't fit that neat little leftist radical box. And then suddenly it's not worth mentioning or doing any deep soul searching about or threatening of leftist cities. Okay.
Nora, I gotta ask you this too. Like, supposedly the left were responsible for all the extreme
Yes.
violence. We're
Yes.
also, did you go to the DHD? What is it? I think is it the Department of, it's HUD, I think, the HUD website,
Yes.
where it says where the government is shut down because of, is it leftist radicals or something like that?
Hmm.
So I gotta ask you, it's left is responsible for all the violence,
Yep.
responsible for the government shutting down. What happened to the stereotype of, the left just being lazy as hell and
Yes.
sucking off the government?
Incompetent. Yes. Yeah.
We
Like
can't
type
be both.
one.
My God, we can't be both.
I
So
know. There is a
anyhow.
little bit of like, you doth protest too much right now going on with the Trump administration. But yeah, like we said a few weeks ago and a few weeks before that, and what we'll probably unfortunately be saying a few weeks from now, our episode with Renee Hopkins on gun violence prevention really holds up and I think sheds some important light on these really complex conversations around gun violence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, as we even said, I think during that episode, it's never not going to be relevant, unfortunately,
Mm.
and here we are again. Um, but while we're on the subject of terrible things,
You have more? Oh,
there's more.
darn.
There's more.
Okay.
Uh, the Trump administration just rolled out a shiny new national security directive called NSPM 7. And guess what? There's some things that they have banned. And what is on that list, you might ask? Oh, just being anti-Christian, anti-capitalist, or anti-American. So basically the entire user base of Blue Sky, plus anyone who's ever ordered from Haymarket Books.
Yeah, you were listening to those, and I was like, "Check, check." It's honestly like he kind of pulled our old Tumblr accounts and handed them to the FBI.
That's definitely guilty of that, I gotta say. Ah, jeez.
No, seriously, if even if the government isn't showing up at your door, this kind of a policy gives cover for your boss to suddenly decide that things you say in private are a fireable offense, and I think that's what the pretext is here. So we've officially entered the kind of minority report era, except instead of pre-crime, it's like having pre-opinions or something.
Oh, Nora, it's so alarmist. I mean, we've seen so much of corporate America and bosses just stand up for the free speech
I
of their
know. And
employees. Wait, oh
universities are doing a great
gosh.
job of that right
I
now too. So
all the entire tech community. My goodness.
yeah.
I'm sure we'll be fine. I'm sure we'll be fine. So anyway, though, as we, love our listeners, we, dear listener, are going to give you a bit of a primer that we came up with a few things that you are probably going to be off limits saying under NSPM 7. So here we go. First up, saying capitalism is bad. That's not a subjective hot take anymore. That is a felony.
Okay, right. So no talking about the actual price of milk or medicines. Got it. And we're also going to have to make sure that no one questions the flat earthers or the creationists. That will definitely get you put on a list faster than ordering a guillotine off of Etsy.
Exactly. And also, don't you dare say brunch is a scam because it now qualifies as anti-Christian, which fair, but also true. 20 bucks for eggs. Jesus would flip that table too. I gotta say, Nora.
Yes. Definitely not okay to say that the founding fathers were just rich slave owners and Whigs who were cosplaying as philosophers, because how dare we disrespect the original theater kids of democracy? Actually, better yet, I think we should just play it safe and side with Mad King George in the Revolution. The Boston Tea Party was a thuggish riot against tariffs, and it definitely wouldn't have happened if Trump were in charge.
That's actually a damn good point. You also definitely cannot say the US military is just the world's most expensive CrossFit gym. Even though, let's be real, after that Hexif address, the army might as well just be burpees with bullets. I gotta say.
Yes,
Mm.
and God forbid you participate in the latest TikTok dance craze. That is a zone of radicalization that must be purged for the safety of today's youth. Though mostly, I should say, TikTok radicalizes me into wanting more puppies and thinking that I can actually sing.
You can. You can, or you can't get more
Ooh.
puppies. More puppies,
Oh,
but
thank you.
but here's the big one, folks, and I've seen this on a couple of signs, around Seattle, actually, at protests, that are still legal, by the way, so you can go out and protest. But I saw this one recently. It said, "Jesus would have voted for rent control. That'll get you sent straight to Guantanamo. Do not pass go. Do not collect your security deposit at all. It's, it that is yeah, that'll get you gone." So, look, folks, we joke because the alternative is screaming into a reusable tote bag from Trader Joe's. And yeah, so here we are.
No, humor is basically how we're strapping the oxygen mask onto each other these days, which is, I think, why we're so thrilled to have Kashana Cauley with us today. She is a razor sharp writer and comedian and author of The Payback. She's here to help us dissect race, capitalism, and this week's speed run through fascism, and to remind us how jokes can be armor, scalpel, and collective resilience.
Here, here. Kashana Cauley is the author of the new novel, The Payback, a darkly humorous novel about the predatory student loan industry and a young, underemployed saleswoman who decides to do something about it. The book was recently listed as a New York Times editor's choice. Kashana is also the author of The Survivalist, which was named a best book of 2023 by the BBC, The Today Show, Vogue, and many other outlets. She's a TV writer who has written for The Great North, Pod Save America, and The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and a former contributing opinion writer for the New York Times. She has also written for The Atlantic, Esquire, The New Yorker, Pitchfork, and Rolling Stone, among others.
Kashana, we're so excited to talk with you about your book. I think both Marcus and I read it over the summer, and we were like, we've got to get her on the podcast because this is so timely and so relevant to so much of what we're talking about.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's really great to chat with you. So your book starts out by reading like it's this kind of speculative fiction in this near future time. This character named Jada Williams works in a mall after losing her Hollywood designer job. And after being fired from her role job, she quickly starts to have these sort of like run ins with this mysterious and newly created debt police force that seems to be detaining and beating up people, mostly women of color, all over LA. I mean, I know you were trying to write fiction and funny fiction at that. But did you realize that by the time the book came out, it would feel this close to reality?
No, I think the ice raid started like either the week before the book came out or the week after the book came out, and I was gobsmacked at how much of the book they were doing. They were not doing like the more fun part of the Debt Police stuff. They were not wearing turquoise and they were not talking about wellness, but they were chasing people down the street and wrestling them into submission so that they could handcuff them and stuff them into cars and take them to be detained, which is really close stuff. I was completely weirded out by that. It sucks to predict bad futures. I would suggest predicting good futures if you ever have the chance to do that, like fun futures that people want. At the same time, it's cool to discuss these issues at a time when they could not feel more relevant. So I'll say that.
I feel like you've created a new category of maybe, like, anticipatory nonfiction. Um, and if you could do us a solid and write a somewhat less scary book next time, that would be great.
That's what my husband said. He's like, "Could you predict like happier futures?" And instead, I'm always just like, "Well, if you look at policing and you project where it could be going in the future, well, if you look at like the wellness movement and you go, doesn't this feeling like it's getting kind of punitive all the time? If you look at, if you look at debt and our societal hatred of it, what how dark could that possibly get? What sorts of things could they do to folks who have debt? And what's funny is like, and on top of the ICE thing, the Department of Education decided to put their debt enforcement tools to work. I want to say 2 or 3 months before the book came out. All of a sudden, they were just like, "We know how we haven't been enforcing people's debt collection. Well, we do that now, and there could be criminal penalties, and we could do things like take your commercial vehicle license or even your driver's license if you don't make debt payments, which of course would hinder you from getting the sort of work that would help you to make those payments." And I was just like, wow, now we're going to see how many different ways we can punish people with debt too. I mean, a lot of this was
Mhm.
foreseeable. To be honest, I was one of those people who sat around in 2024 going, I want Kamala to be racking up more support than she is. I see a lot of excitement on the other side. I feel like he's still their guy and they still like him. And voter suppression is terrible. And if you want to figure, I mean, it was all feasible. But at the same time, there was some excitement about Kamala's campaign, especially in the summer. And there were all that brat summer stuff. And I was like, if she could pull this out, maybe this book doesn't have to happen.
Yeah, if only, if only. I mean, your book is just it's such to me, it's such a important reference point for today's younger generations. You have a lot of Gen Zers who are deciding to just skip college altogether, because of the cost and so forth. And I'm just thinking about the themes that Payback touches on, whether it's indebtedness, misogynoir, economic precarity, surveillance states, and just also again that dark humor which many of us are using right now as a coping mechanism to deal with all of this. So do in your opinion, do some of the book's themes reflect your own personal stories and experiences? I just was wondering that as I
I
was reading
definitely
through
have
it.
some college debt that made this book possible. I paid it off.
Who, who doesn't, right?
I was fortunate in the fact that I was able to pay it off with TV writing work. But that's like winning the lottery. I don't think people should have to win the lottery to be able to make a financially feasible decision to improve themselves through education. And that's a lot of what the book's about. You shouldn't have to do a heist. You shouldn't have to sneak into your loan company and maybe try and erase the records. College should be free, honestly, and if we can't do free, affordable, because it's an important part of what employers look for after you get out of more and more jobs require a degree. And so more and more jobs basically, if you're working class, require you to go into debt under the hopes of getting some sort of job to pay off that debt. And the job opportunities that are available to you otherwise are not that wide. I'm sort of proud of Gen Z for going, can we skip this? Especially because as a working class
Mhm.
person who's struggled with, my parents couldn't help me out financially for college. We were that kind of working class, and so it's really tough when you're looking at the actual financial name numbers when you get your package and you're like, can I cover this? I'm not sure I could cover this.
Mhm.
Um, and it would be great in addition to making college free or lower cost if like vocational stuff could be more publicized, honestly. I feel like a lot of the issue is a lot of us end up doing either what our parents do or what we hear about. And so there's a lot of careers and a lot of educational opportunities you don't hear about. I think it would be nice if people got more exposure to what was out there by the time they had to make this decision at like 16, 17, 18 years old. What vocational opportunities are out there? What requires a degree? What doesn't? What can you do to keep it low cost? Just more information, honestly, as well as an attempt to make it all more affordable. But yeah, I yeah.
Yeah.
Amen to all of that. Yeah. I mean, it's worth mentioning that, like, in the 1980s, like, there wasn't really such a thing as student loans. College was vastly more affordable than it is today. And, this is part of a very problematic kind of rise of late liberalism. But I think one of the things that I love about the novel is that it really talks about debt, not just as like a systemic problem, but also as this like deeply personal thing, right? That it shapes relationships and choices. It's part of one's kind of like lived experience of the world every day. Um, how are you thinking about capturing that dual reality? And did you feel like fiction was a uniquely positioned form for showing the kind of intimate and structural effects of
Very much
that?
so. I feel like fiction in particular allows you to get deeper emotionally and viscerally into things. A lot of times I love nonfiction, but you're trying to make an argument a lot, just and so you dedicate a lot of your energy to that. And emotions are not as emphasized or as they can be in fiction. So it was nice to be able to put them in and go, this isn't just a systemic problem I want to talk about in like a 700-word article. This is so when you go to the bar at night, what can I afford to buy? So how much can I afford to hang out with my friends? So if I decide to go for a drink or for a bachelorette party, is that going to ruin my ability to pay rent, to pay my loans? You can talk about people making the sorts of everyday decisions that you do make when you're indebted and how much the debt ends up affecting everything you do. I think fiction is a better vehicle for that. Just showing day-to-day life emotionally also. There's a lot of humiliation and shame in going, well, I can't afford what my friends can afford. Or I can't, even if your friends can't afford it too. Just we're all broke together is only fun for so long. Like, after a while, it's just like, man, why? Especially at the age my characters are in the book, they're all pushing 40. I think we have these narratives where, yeah, you take the debt out, or this idealistic narrative. You take the debt out and then you pay it off and you're fine. And there's this point in adulthood where you don't have to deal with this anymore. And I think for more and more people, that isn't true. And my characters were definitely the pushing 40 types were like, I thought this was going to be solved by now. I thought they've all had careers that are better than the mall that they work at and more fun and more exciting, and they thought we're going to pay more than this or keep them from the fate of having to go back to the mall and earn like retail money, which anybody who works in retail knows that that's trash and may not allow you to address loans. And so that disappointment but I'm about at midlife and I still have not figured out how I can pay my bills on a regular basis that will not get me into trouble with all these folks I owe is just, yeah, fiction is a good vehicle for the feelings.
Yeah. I gotta say you are in good company with, trying to trying to, suss out what you can pay and what people, to try not to make, certain folks angry, I guess, with bill collectors, I will tell you that. But I I do love just how, your use of absurdity, in this novel, particularly around the debt police, which it very much reminded me, I'm not sure how much you were trying to evoke her or conjure her, but it certainly reminded me, so much of of Octavia Butler and some of her sort of future gazing, if you will. Some unfortunate future gazing, as we already brought up. That that being said, though, um, you know, you obviously you have this group in there called the Debt Police, which are essentially targeting Black Americans in order to get them to pay back this debt, and obviously that's to me certainly that's a parallel with some of the privatized police forces that we've had here in America, and continue to have, unfortunately, who continue to abuse Black Americans and Americans of color and other marginalized groups. And so I'm wondering, how important did it feel to you that this book's narrative did have that the protagonists in this book that they did have encounters with this, with what was this strange new policing force in the U.S. here?
Um, really important. I do agree with you. I think that, um, unfortunately, a lot of times Black people are the first line of folks who are on the front line of how much are we interacting with the police? How harmful is this? What are the consequences of this interaction with the police? How much is this going to ruin my life? Um, it was important to talk about that. It was, but also, I think to a certain extent, a lot of people do not understand the effects of over policing on folks' lives. If you haven't encountered this, if you don't know people who have. And so it was a nice opportunity to talk about some of the things that Black women, other women of color, other folks of color go through first through fiction and in kind of an absurdist way. To be honest, I think a lot of the ways in which Black people deal with the police are absurdist. Like, there's a lot of, so I'm just on my porch, and yet somebody thinks I shouldn't be on, say, my own porch or eating at. There was this guy. He
Right.
actually wrote for the Bear, so I was like, "Oh, we're getting the screenwriters now. It's gross." I mean, I know they can get anywhere, but I guess he was on a train in Connecticut, and some white lady didn't like the way he was sitting. And so she called the cops, and like the train people hauled him off the train because, he was not sitting right. And I was like, and I immediately thought of, like, I mean, he's okay, but I immediately thought of, like, Emmett Till and, like, the Jim
Right.
Crow
Thank God.
stories. And
Mm,
I just I wanted to, but this is absurdist. Like, you can't sit. Like, what's happening?
right. I mean, it's like the guy who was he was in Central Park, I believe, and the lady, called he was
Mhm.
bird watching, and the lady, was calling the police on him. You had the incident with Henry Louis Gates and the first year of Obama's first term, where he's just trying to get back into his home, and they call the police on him, and
I mean, I think one of the fascinating things for me about this book and the way you've crafted it, though, is you're also turning the absurdity back on the police force. And so, like, I think you kind of mentioned that the debt police are really weird. Like, they're often, like, talking about astrology as they're, like, beating people up. So what kind of juxtaposition were you trying to create there for readers, and, like, why was that an important source of humor in the book? Like, very
I
dark
don't
humor,
think
but
that
humor.
on the scale of things, cops care about the ways in which they're ruining your life. I wanted to find a way to deal with that sort of indifference in a way that I personally found entertaining so I could keep feeling connected to the book. That's how they wore turquoise, that's how they got into crystals. The indifference is the same. I mean, they can be talking about mushroom facials, or they could be talking about where they're grabbing dinner, or they could be talking about, what's on sports this weekend. The indifference is always there. But the fact that they're indifferent to you is the part I've always found absurdist. They're ruining your life, and they could care less. I thought the turquoise and the crystals was a fun way to illustrate that indifference.
Yeah, it's definitely a really fun way of kind of, like, punching up and highlighting the absurdity of, these human beings, who are doing this to other human beings. It takes a particular kind of talent to write about these topics with humor, and it's a particular kind of very dark and sharp humor. I think the New York Times called you lethally witty, which I think is perfect. Um, how do you cultivate that kind of humor? Why does it feel important to continue writing with humor even about topics like this in this particular time?
I grew up in a gallows humor family. We were working class, and my parents' way of dealing with that was to put on stand up, was to make their own jokes, was to try and find the funny side of any sort of weird situation we were in. I loved that. I immediately loved that as a tone that they brought to the operations. I grew up thinking of humor as something that brought people together and made them feel closer. I don't actually have a close family. We do not necessarily get along, but when they let my parents were to the point where they played stand up in the car. I mean, like, you couldn't actually swear, but you could quote bits. That's what kinds of people they were. So, like, you couldn't swear, but, like, Robert Williams has this bit where, like, he thinks it's very funny when tiny little kids swear, and so he says "fuck it" in a 2-year-old voice as the ender, and so you could say "fuck it," but you couldn't say "fuck it." And I just I mean, I'm telling you this story, but I think I was like 8 or 9 when I heard the stand up in the car on cassette. And I just still remember this as a moment. My whole family is dying. We got the windows down and we're so loud and everybody's laughing at this like they just discovered what laughter was. And I was like, I have kind of a contentious family. People are at odds, but laughter is really the warmth and the togetherness that is the upside of hanging out with these folks. I find that as I aim humor towards people who I'm not related to, a lot of these same things happen. that everybody feels warmth
Um,
and togetherness, and when they write me emails and go, "I liked your book," or when they write out to me on social media and go, "I liked your jokes," I just tell jokes on the internet all day long.
oh,
It's what I do. And they that same warmth and togetherness happens, and I think, it's nice to have humor be something we can use to feel good about bringing ourselves together. That's why I like having it in books too.
Mm.
I know there's a lot of great serious authors out there, but I like a good punchline in a book. I feel like um there are lots of different ways to get your emotional point across in literature. And I like humor as one that hopefully provokes that same sort of sense of warmth and togetherness and belonging and us all being on the same team as drama can or as tragedy or horror.
Yeah, I gotta ask you that. Like, I mean, I would say with every day bringing like some new, fresh hell or horror in in the news cycle, but it seems like it's every hour. Like but before I hopped on, I was just checking like the breaking news alerts in my email, and again, it just seems like there's a fresh hill like at the top of the hour every day. Like how do you keep, your sense of humor? Like how are you just able to keep that intact in these days and times without it, just falling into either some level of I don't know, just cultural nihilism, I guess.
I care deeply about the effects of the news, even as my main way in dealing with those effects is to find punchlines. I always know that there are people whose lives are at stake, where the consequences of the news are, well, quite frankly, life wrecking for a lot of folks or life changing. I feel like there's always a humanity there, and I feel that humanity, even if the way I'd like to address it is to gallows humor all day long, so I don't feel depressed all day long. It's survival to me, gallows humor, but it's also a way of going, I'm not that old. I'm gonna have to get through decades of this potentially, depending on how the government ends up shaping out and like whether or not those
we, we can hope. We can hope.
whether or not those of us who oppose these systems are actually able to root them out or not. And I go, well, how do people survive? How did like my ancestors survive this? To be honest, I love thinking of the
Mm.
slaves just telling jokes every day. I love going, you know what, we're in chains, and this might not, this might be forever, but, there's something hilarious. And can this guy even attach these right? Like, this one around my ankle is loose. I just like picturing them getting through it that way because I guess watching old stand up makes you go, oh, well, comedians have gotten through this forever. And we watched a lot of black stand up, and I was like, oh, well, black people have gotten through this by joking around forever. And I think, I want to work towards change in life in a more systemic, direct way.
Mm.
But also, the terms of surviving every day, I gotta laugh.
Yeah, somebody was I forgot who was saying it, but I was listening to somebody and they were saying your democracy only really ceases when, when they start getting rid of the comedians, and they were talking about how in Nazi Germany some of the first people that they got rid of were what they called the
Mhm.
Witticists, who were essentially, the comedians at that time. So as long as you are still around, I'm hopeful for our
Oh,
country, I guess.
they don't have comedians in
Anyhow.
Russia either. Oh, that stuff's real. No, you cannot laugh at Putin. That's illegal. When they were
Do Russians have like comedians in general? It just always
oh,
seems like a
yeah,
drab,
vicious, dark humor.
historically a
No,
drab
no.
place.
They're actually deeply funny. I hung out with a lot of Russian Americans growing up and just it's this almost like violently dark sense of humor. Loved it. Like they are 100% gallows. Truly one of the best senses of humor out there. I don't think you could do that in Russia, but in Wisconsin where I grew up, the Russians were so fun. The Russian Americans so funny. Dark humor, just like I associate with black people, but really, really, really funny. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a all of this is a very good reminder that authoritarianism fears humor the most in some ways. So I think I love that this book is ultimately a story about like just really scrappy resistance, right? Which is a major theme of our podcast. We love scrappy resistance where it comes from unlikely places. The revolution against the debt police in your book is led by these sort of three down on their luck retail workers who are just completely fed up. Um, do you hope that you're not that you're not that your book is going to inspire sort of like anti-state hacky violence, but do you hope that your book inspires some sense of resistance among its readers to these kind of sort of faceless systems that bring so much oppression
Yeah,
into
I'm
our
gonna
lives?
officially state on the record that I am completely not supporting anybody's desire to take down the student loan industry using the exact methods pointed out in the book. But if it happens, I would just kind of neutrally understand what you had to do.
Observe.
Yeah, from
Yeah.
far away.
Well, I mean, what's so funny is, like, week 1 of Trump administration 2, people were like, "Last one out of the Department of Education, make sure to delete the files."
But to get back to the other part of your question, what everyday people have done so far to oppose authoritarianism in this country is what I find the most inspiring. I live in LA, and the biggest front against ICE has been the people who get down on the streets to the point where ICE runs away. All of a sudden, ICE comes up and people put out the call, and there's 100 people on the block. And ICE is like, oh no, there's 100 people here. There's 50 of them filming us. Maybe we're not going to be able to get away with kidnapping somebody today, and they drive off. These are viral TikTok, YouTube videos. They happen like all the time. That's like the organized Democratic Party has not done like as good a job getting rid of ICE as like the various neighborhood people of LA. So that stuff's already happening. I also see a lot of mutual aid in my community. A lot of people just handing out food. A lot of like food fridges and stuff for folks who just need to come by and grab something and don't have food this month. A lot of just like we still have mask blocks in LA. We still have people who give away like toiletries. We have a ton of wildfire support for the wildfires in January. Like everybody I know has done some tiny bit of wildfire relief work. Like I signed books for people who had lost their entire library collections for a charity event, and they wanted things to read. We all sat around like in April, my friend who wanted to help Altadena people in particular. They're a little poorer than the Palisades folks, although the Palisades folks have also needed assistance. But yeah, like we help them replenish their libraries. It's been really fun to be involved in tiny, tiny ways on the ground and see people's face light up when you can like give them something to read in the new apartment they live at. I very much hope it inspires people to get involved in their community in any small way they can. I think they're already doing that, but I would love for it to inspire more. These girls do work at the mall, and they are the scrappiest. They have no resources whatsoever other than what they're willing to put together with their own wits and their own imagination. I do have somebody who used to hack personally and then for the government, but that's just her putting together her skill set and going, can we hack into the student loan databases? No, she's using the skill set she has. And I do think we can all do that. And I hope we keep going.
I always love books with, the protagonists are folks who are quite frankly just non-pale and male. And um obviously not just here, but most of your work puts ordinary black women at the center of extraordinary and often again absurd struggles with power and survival. So I guess I want to ask you this. Do you see your work as building a kind of alternative canon of protagonists who disrupt how we usually imagine resistance in fiction?
Yes, as well as disrupting how we see black women in fiction because they're and in real life, honestly. I feel
Mm.
like a lot of black women in fiction are still following the rules, still trying to dot the I's and cross the T's, trying not to get too far afoul of the system for fear that they get lashed back upon. And I want to create a nice safe space for them to screw up, to fuck up, to have the sorts of big wide ranging adventures that I associate typically with other types of protagonists and other colors and genders of folks in books, and to not necessarily suffer the huge negative outcomes that black women do typically when we step outside of coloring inside the lines. I don't want the death and the destruction and the sexual assault for us. I do see it as an alternative kind of canon. I I feel like in a lot of ways liberation is allowing everyone to be able to act freely without um gendered or racial restrictions or cultural limitations on what it is that they're able or expected to do. And so having my protagonists be ordinary black women who are allowed to behave in an extraordinary way, I would argue is a strike against the sort of system that declares that there are certain rules for what black women are allowed to or expected to do.
I mean, along the same lines, as I was reading this, I was just consistently thinking, this is a book about abolition in our modern times. not just abolition from state-sponsored systems of violence and policing, but also abolition from economic forms of violence. We're big fans here of groups like the Debt Collective that have been talking about debt and getting rid of it as work of abolition rather than debt forgiveness, right? And I'm wondering if that was something you were explicitly thinking about and writing to?
Yes. I don't think this system should exist. I'm actually doing an event with the Debt Collective, and the University of
Yay!
Illinois
Good for
Chicago
them.
English Department in Chicago on October 29th. Where I hope we get into debt forgiveness not as simply a temporary thing or a programmatic thing, but as hopefully a systemic way of redoing the way we look at funding college. And so I cannot wait to have those discussions on the 29th and was very much thinking about it in terms of the book. I hope that people read this book and they come away with the idea that there's actually no reason for the student loan system to exist, that all it does is punish working class
Mhm,
people who want to improve themselves by getting more education. And increasingly the middle class, quite frankly. School has gotten very, very,
mhm.
very expensive for pretty much everybody but the rich, and it benefits no one to hang these albatrosses of debt around our necks for what is an education that we're expected to get.
Yeah, I think the Debt Collective has this saying that, like, if you owe the bank $100, it's your
Mhm.
problem, but if you owe the bank $100,000,000, it's the bank's problem, and that's sort of their way of mobilizing people collectively, and I sort of think that your book is, like, the fiction version of mobilizing people collectively to think differently about debt, so
Very
thank you
much
for
so.
that.
I very much, again, also wanted everyday, like ordinary day to day Black protagonists who are just trying to like eke together a living where they can pay rent on time on a regular basis without getting kicked out of their apartments. Give them a chance to be the heroes of the everyday American who should not have to be indebted due to college.
Yeah, I'd also wanna ask you this because there's so many we have so many books. I would say probably 99% of what passes for American fiction these days that don't ever tackle capitalism and its absurdities and its contradictions, and you do that just straight up head on in this book. Like, how I want to ask you, how cognizant were you of attempting to do that and doing it in a way in which you did, where by the end of the book, I mean, I the most stalwart Milton Friedman style neoliberal capitalist would just has to be able to say, maybe the system isn't working for us. I don't know.
Very cognizant from a lot of areas of my life that I think feed into the book. Like I've mentioned, I grew up working class in Wisconsin. As a Black woman, a perspective that you don't see much in literature. But I also majored in economics, and I hated it the whole time. From we don't
I was
That
an
would
academic
also say
minor, so I feel your pain.
there
I
is
feel your
so
pain.
much that I hate about the professional study of economics. Um, I hated the part where they were just like, well, the African economies don't really count because they're not doing anything on a global scale that really affects how we study. Basically, the economies who count was one thing I hated hearing in undergrad. I hated, well, we don't really look at things like can people pay rent or afford groceries in our official economic indicators because we're more concerned with things like, basically what do rich guy white guys care about? So like stock prices and like so when you turn on like CNBC, you're basically seeing what about the economy is important to like a rich white guy. You don't actually see because I feel like last year we were having this big debate, kind of at least in the circles I was running with, was is the economy worse than it looks? Because I don't know, the indicators are always going up. The stock market's always going up. People, nobody complains about the interest rates on TV because I guess they're not looking for mortgages and I would pay 7%, which for your average person is horrible. Like that's a horrible rate. But the struggles of everyday people are not affected, are not represented in both our official economic indices as well as our economic coverage in newspapers and on television. I very much was like, I I come to this from the formal study of economics and how much it ignores everyday people, and very much wanted to present an alternative view on the economic state of everyday Americans in a way that economists do not think of or even approve of talking about. The pushback you get when you're like, shouldn't something that the working class deal with be like actually be reflected in the indicators? When you see that the economy is good, shouldn't that mean that people can afford a car if they need to drive to work or that they can afford to pay rent for a year? Like, shouldn't there be a rent index or something? And people are just like, "Oh, no, no, how could you measure that?" Is often how it's presented, as if you can't sample a certain amount of people, just like you do in polling or the other types of sampling, and ask how much rent they're
Right.
paying and ask how affordable they find it. You just the formal study of economics is not interested in engaging with the working class. They don't want to talk to them. They're not interested in
Mm.
what money means to them in their lives. And so, yeah, this is 100% a broadside against that way of thinking. I totally want Milton Friedman, he's not dead, to read this book and go, maybe I should have thought about the working class when I was coming up with all the stuff that made me famous.
I gotta say, I mean, you talking now, then in the context of the book, right? I mean, it reminded me so much of what, and then I'm paraphrasing Robert F. Kennedy, the less problematic one, when he was running for president, and he said, our GDP, our domestic product, it measures essentially like it can measure like a broken arm if somebody has to go on and be put on an ambulance, but it doesn't measure the compassion between two people, right? It doesn't measure the kindness. It doesn't measure if a friend is allowing another friend to borrow a lawnmower, right? That's not quote unquote economic activity. And so I want to ask you, I mean, what did because I'm just curious of what your answer would be, but what do you think when you get to the end of the book, and without any spoilers, of course? I mean, what are you trying to say, also just about solidarity and compassion and how it can show up in day to day life?
I have a great amount of respect for the community that Americans have attempted to create in a society that does not encourage that. And I feel that the book is a tribute to that. It's a tribute to neighbors helping each other out, to friends helping each other out, to people who look at our economic cold system and go, yeah, but what can I do for the people in my life? Well, how can I make their lives better? How can I make American financial existence, which is brutal and awful, how can I make that warmer and more friendly? How can I reach through and get connected to people instead of keeping myself alone and addicted to screens and at the mercy of economic indicators that are not for me?
Well, I would say you were successful. So
Yes.
thank you.
Um, we have a little practice on the show where we like to end each episode by sharing one thing that's giving us joy in the moment. And I think that's a theme that's kind of run throughout this conversation. But I wanted to ask you more specifically if there's something that's giving you joy these days, even if small. Um, and if so, what is it?
What's giving me joy these days? I I'm like I've been on book tour for 3 months and I love it. I don't get me wrong, like I just was thinking about this because I just did 2 dates this weekend in New York, and we talked about very different angles of this book in those 2 dates. The some of the ordinary representation of black women, some of the what did they do have to do to survive stuff. The part where she eats food for money came up a lot. Um, the way it sounds. And it's been a pleasure in this time when I think there's a lot of attacks on the arts in particular to be able to meet with, well, for a better word, book nerds, like people who hold books in their hands and want you to sign them and want to talk about the issues within them. I think if you just read the news every day, you would get a sense that people don't read, that they just spend all day staring at screens, that they don't really interact with other people. And so it's actually been a pleasure to be on the road for 3 months and to see that that's not true at all. That people are thinking about deeper issues, that they want to have a deeper connection with folks, that they are thinking about the big things as well as the small things, that they want to read and keep educating themselves and connect to other people who read and educate themselves. The Brooklyn Book Festival, which was on Saturday, was this incredible demonstration. Hundreds of people reading anything from like little tiny publications you probably haven't heard of to big books that are probably going to win awards this year, and just giggling in together in like groups of 2 and 3 and just going, isn't this cool? Isn't this cool that we can be in a place where everybody loves reading, loves being together about reading, loves talking about reading? So yeah, it's as the arts get officially defunded from the top, it is amazing to travel around the country and see people who very much are into them, who are defending them, who are reading books and thinking about bigger ideas. That's what I'm getting a kick out of these days because I haven't been home in 3 months. Today is my first day home from like in a long time. Yeah, and I just
Oh, well, welcome home, and thanks for spending some time with us instead of your cats or whatever animals deserve your attention.
No, Yeah, well, we just again just want to say just thank you so much for yes, taking the time, but also just thank you so much for writing this book. I couldn't tell you how much of a needed balm it ended up being for me, particularly I'm somebody as a journalist who have to read a lot of creative nonfiction, or it's not creative, it's just nonfiction. And my God, it's this was yeah, this was I this was everything. So just thank you so much for this book.
Agreed. Yeah. Thank you for your work. Thanks for making us laugh.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for reading the book and getting a kick out of it. I think we've had a really fun conversation. So,
Nora, I must say you started off by saying that, you know, humor is something that we need right now in these moments. And yes, after that interview, I can say that my cup, it may not all the way be filled only because it started from sort of a negative uh
I know you're
level.
also holding room for our 8 ounces
I
of
I
joy,
am.
Marcus.
I But it's definitely 3/4. It's definitely up
Okay,
to
good.
3/4. So yeah.
No, it's I think that, Kashana's work shows us a way to find humor and also reckon with what the reality of things actually are, and that's such a rare combination.
Yeah, but I think ultimately, right? I mean, that's life, right? I remember Mike Nichols. He was the director of the movie The Graduate, which some say don't hold up all that well, but whatever. But he said, he was asked, whether it was a comedy or a drama, and he said,
Mm,
It's life, and life is
mm,
comedy, life is drama, life is sorrow, life is grief, life
yeah,
is ecstasy. It's life, and so yeah, I think we forget that sometimes. I think when we're sort of down in the pits of doom and gloom and so forth. And so it's good to
yeah,
be reminded that life is much larger than the emotion of the moment or whatever the situation is going on in your life at the moment.
yeah, and the reminder as well that humor and comedy is collective was just
Yes,
so awesome
yes.
that, like, it's a collective practice, it's a collective thing that we do together, and it brings people together is, um, just a beautiful reminder.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of beautiful reminders, Nora, what was your 8 ounces of joy over this past week?
Well, I think mine is a little silly, but probably something that other people saw this week and gave them joy. Um, Breaking news is that Reading Rainbow is back.
Yes.
Despite
Okay.
the
Let's go.
underfunding of PBS, Reading Rainbow is here to stay, and the new host is gonna be the amazing Mychal the Librarian. If I don't know if you follow him at all, but he's just, like, just incredibly charming, lovely person who reminds you that, like, libraries are spaces of community and acceptance, but also, like, radicalization, and just is, like, such a beautiful spokesperson for everything that libraries can be, and
Yeah.
I'm thrilled for him. I'm thrilled that Reading Rainbow is still gonna exist in our world. So that's my tiny piece of joy for this week.
That's a great piece. I mean, it's gonna be hard for anybody to replace LeVar Burton, who is the uh,
Agreed.
original host, but I think the librarian is up to the task, I must say. So we shall see. My joy though, Nora, is actually Ashada Sakor.
Mm,
She passed away peacefully in Cuba. Since our last episode, and for
mhm,
those who don't know her, please look her up. She was a
yeah,
revolutionary leader in the '60s and '70s. She was convicted of, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of people, including, I don't
mhm,
know, maybe just the evidence, the actual evidence. Was convicted wrongfully of the killing of a police officer.
mhm,
There's You can read about the details of it, but essentially she had her hands up the entire time, and yet she was still convicted. She ended up fleeing to Cuba and living out the rest of her life there. And one of the things that I think, you know, her passing sort of provided a I shouldn't say for her passing provided joy, but the knowledge that
Hmm.
she got to die in peace provided joy, in the sense
Yeah.
that there are so many one time quote unquote revolutionary leaders who don't, quite frankly, don't get to grow old. They they either die very young,
Yeah.
what which happened to Fred Hampton, or they ended up selling out, and
Hmm.
you can barely recognize the people that they were. So,
Mm.
um, but one thing that I really want to read is, some words that she wrote on the dawn of the 21st century, and she said, "This is the 21st century, and we need to redefine revolution. This planet needs a people's revolution, a humanist revolution. Revolution is not about bloodshed or about going to the mountains and fighting. We will fight if we are forced to, but the fundamental goal of revolution must be peace. We need a revolution of the mind. We need a revolution of the heart. We need a revolution of the spirit. The power of the people is stronger than any weapon. A people's revolution can't be stopped. We need to be weapons of mass construction, weapons of mass love. It's not enough just to change the system. We need to change ourselves. We have got to make this world user friendly, user friendly. Are you ready to sacrifice to end world hunger, to sacrifice to end colonialism, to end neocolonialism, to end racism, to end sexism? Revolution means the end of exploitation. Revolution means respecting people from other cultures. Revolution is creative. Revolution means treating your mate as a friend and an equal. Revolution is sexy. Revolution means respecting and learning from your children. Revolution is beautiful. Revolution means protecting the people, the plants, the animals, the air, the water. Revolution means saving this planet. Revolution is love. Ashada Sakor. So, hey, much respect to her. I'm not a person who, believes in an afterlife, but I will say, so I won't say rest in peace, but I will say
Mm.
rest in beloved memory.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing her words with us. I am at the beginning of my graduate classes, I always ask students to share quotes by organizers that they find particularly inspirational or like particularly drive their beliefs in life. And anytime I have a student who shares a quote by her, I'm like, you're good. You're good people. We're going to be friends. You get it.
Any students who want to game the system,
Yeah.
Nora has
That is
told you how.
a free extra credit advice for my classes.
well, well, on that note, shall we go ahead and close out today's
Uh,
episode?
it's as good a time as any, Marcus. Well, we know you might be busy hoarding oat milk like it's a cryptocurrency or hate scrolling Zillow listings you'll never afford. But we are so grateful that you've spent some time with us this week. Big thanks to our guest, the incredibly talented Kashana Cauley, and to our producer, Jessica Partnow, who somehow makes us sound like we have our lives together every week. And the music you hear is from the incomparable Aham Aluo. Yes, we are cooler by association.
Oh, yeah. You can find In the Meanwhile wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. And look, your support doesn't just keep the lights on, it helps us cover the legal fees we'll definitely be racking up once the powers that be get a whiff of this episode. You can subscribe or donate, please do both, to the podcast at inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. New episodes drop every Friday. But until then, we'll see you in the meanwhile.